What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the Boardroom podcast, where we help you stay calm, change lives, and have business on your terms. Now, I've got a very special guest with me, Mr. Nolan Bradbury. And Nolan has been somebody I've been working with for a couple of years now. I honestly don't even remember how I got introduced to them. I think somebody kind of like mentioned him as like a really good accountant or something like that. I don't remember how it came to be, but it was a referral, and we've been working together ever since. Most entrepreneurs have nothing but bad things to say about their accountants. And I was actually on their call not long ago, and they were just venting about how frustrating it was working with their accountants. And I was like, I love working with my accountant. The guy is awesome.
Appreciate that.
And they were like, really? I was like, yeah, like he's actually phenomenal, complete. I don't know what it's like. Actually, I do. I have worked with some like not so great accountants, but they were still pleasant experiences. But working with you has been like next level. So really, really honored to have you on here and honestly bless my audience with you because you are the internet's best kept secret. So hopefully not for long. Right.
I have a lot to live up to. I appreciate all that, Iggy.
Yeah, absolutely. So how'd you get into accounting? Can you give me like your backstory a little bit? Because you don't really come off as like your traditional accountant, to be completely honest.
So I was hoping you were going to say that because I tell people the nicest compliment you can pay me is that I don't seem like an accountant. So that is what I am striving for. Long story short, I went to college, and truthfully, I went to school thinking I was going to go into psychology. That was the thing that really fascinated me. I've always been intrigued by the way humans behave and why we make the decisions we do, and in some cases, why we make the decisions we don't. Like, why do we not do certain things as much as why we do certain things? So I went to college and I took a bunch of classes in psychology, and I enjoyed it. But when you're young and in your 20s, you get allured away by things like that are sexy, like accounting, and that's what happened for me.
I don't know if sexy and accounting has ever been used, and
I'd like to think my wife said that
to describe one another in a sentence.
Hopefully my wife says that, but we'll leave that out of it for now. So, I went to school and I got into the accounting field. And I think the thing that I liked about it was accounting to me was sort of a Rosetta Stone for how business worked. Meaning it translated a lot of things across a lot of landscapes that for me, I really enjoyed. It was an opportunity for me to see a lot of the same thing from a lot of different perspectives. And so graduated, I got my master's in accounting as if an undergraduate degree wasn't nerdy enough. I went into public accounting. I did that for a couple of years. But honestly, the thing is both in public and then when I went into private, the thing that was nagging at me still was I felt like I was doing work for people who didn't really want it. Meaning that it was a necessary evil. I'm sure we've heard talk, like you probably described accounting as that yourself, let's be honest. I just didn't want that experience. Like I wanted to do something that was, I think, probably more in line with the psychology path that was early in my life, which is I wanted to do things for people who actually wanted my help. And so for like the last 10 to 15 years, I've really been focused on founders, entrepreneurs who are looking to grow and scale their business. And truthfully, specifically so in a way that like they want to use that success to build a better personal life. So like I'm really interested in helping the whole, meaning not just the business, but not just the individual, but that intersection of where they meet and help them use one to benefit the other.
I can see that heart from firsthand, right? Like it's not just about crunching numbers, but you want to know how things are going, and you want to know how things are going, like on a personal level, but then also on a business level. So I love that kind of like distinction between how you want to go about it. Is like you're not just wanting to serve a necessary evil, but you want to make like real meaningful impact, which is really what we're all about. And everybody listening here, like they're tuning in because they want to change lives and make a good living doing so.
I think not to reveal too much, but you and I have a regular conversation, right, Iggy? Like we talk on a scheduled basis, right? And the first question I always ask you is, tell me what's new. And I think you can probably be honest and say that like that question is never really about businesses. No, that's not what I'm interested in.
I mean, the stage that I'm in is right. A lot of business stuff is new because we're just perpetually eating glass.
Well,
but
it's not to mean that like the answer can't be business, right? But like I would say like The impetus for that question is I want to understand what's going on in your life. Where are you at mentally, emotionally, physically, business-wise, personal-wise? Like, you can't separate these things. I think that's the struggle, right? Like, if we're struggling at home, business is going to be impacted. We're struggling at work, home is going to be impacted. Like, we are so often defined by all of this stuff that I think you got to look at the whole thing. And if you want to solve people's problems, you got to understand who they are on a whole level, not just a fraction of them.
Yeah. How's that kind of helped you as an accountant? Like, how does that impact what you do? Why is that really important to you to kind of understand what's going on with the person that you're working with on a personal level?
I would say the thing I strive to do for people is to translate accounting jargon into something that like makes sense to them that they can use, right? And so for me, if I can understand you more personally, and I can understand where you're at mentally, and I can understand the things that are maybe preoccupying you or have you focused on, then it allows me, I think, to better connect what's happening in the accounting finance realm back to where you're at, which in hope means that you're going to be able to use that information more meaningfully. Because the data is the data, but if it doesn't do anything for you, then it's worthless. Like, I have a very sort of honest relationship with accounting, which is I don't think it's the end all be all. Like, I'm not under the preconceived notion that like it's the most important thing, but I also think that it can be very valuable if we use it the right way.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, because you're all about like, how do I get you the most relevant information for you, right? Like what, and I remember you asking me, is like, what matters to you right now? Like, as far as like the stage in the business, like what kind of data do you need to be seeing? Which I think is honestly, you're the first accountant that's ever really asked me that question. And to be honest, I didn't even really know at first. So, and I think a lot of people even listening are probably used to just getting random expense reports from their accountant, maybe quarterly, or if the monthly, if they're lucky, or annually, or whatever it is. So for you, because you're also an entrepreneur as well, what is like a good, anyone listening who wants to start like getting regular reports, what do you think are really like core essential items that you need to be mindful of? Like any good expense report, like what are those line items that should be included?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit to answer it, then I'm going to come back and answer it specifically. So bear with me here. So yeah. I think that unfortunately, and I don't think this is intentional, but my accounting brethren are not the greatest at understanding their audience. And so by default, what they give to people, their clients, is oftentimes what they want to see or what they would use to analyze data. But you're not an accountant. And if I give you something that you don't understand, then that's not really your fault. And it doesn't facilitate a good relationship or conversation. So the first key, right, is actually making sure as the provider of that like it's something that is meaningful to you, right? So the question that I asked you, right, was because there are no sacred cows to me. Like I can pull a P&L for you, but I'll be honest with you, that's not really what you should be looking at the end of the day. Like it's not that it's not meaningful, but like the information you need to be pulling out of that are more specific. Like I think the thing, and it's not where you can necessarily start right away, but where as a business owner or as a decision maker in the strategy realm that you need to be able to get to is what are the 3 to 5 metrics or KPIs that give you the pulse of the business and you can look at very quickly and in comparison can give you some context to how things are going. Because really that's the point of data, right? The data is meant to drive strategic decisions. Otherwise, you're running a business on intuition, and that will only last for so long before like that sort of runs its course. So for me, I think that the information that is ideal is one, understanding the audience. So every audience is going to be a little bit different. Do you want charts? Do you want tables? Do you want balances? Like getting to that core. And then I think it's also, what is the relationship between the numbers? Like if I said to you, oh, you have $10,000 in your bank account, and I'm not saying you do, that's just a hypothetical example, right? Like, is that number good or bad? And the answer is, we don't know, because it needs to be taken, it depends, right? That's the answer. It depends on what have you spent money on? What have you collected money on? Like, what do you normally have in your account, right? So context to anything is as important as the information itself. And so to me, it's the combination of easily digestible metrics and KPIs relative to other periods so that you have a sense of what that number means. And that over time, you're going to develop sort of a benchmark of what that number should be. And when you compare it to that, then you're going to go like, oh, things are where they're not, well, things are where they're supposed to be, or, ooh, things are not where they're supposed to be. We need to do some digging. Why is that? Where is money going out the door that I'm not aware of? And I think the last thing I'll say on that, and I got a little long on your question here, is whatever it is you look at is not meant to give you the final answer. And I think that's a misconception that a lot of people have, is that you want to look at the P&L and see all the information. You actually don't. You want to look at the P&L and have it be something that you can actually take in and look at. And then if you have a question, then work with your team to dig into what that question is to get the right answer.
So almost like it should be the P&L or any kind of reports that you generate shouldn't be kind of like the end all be all, but really it should be like
Yes.
smoke signal, right? Or like a traffic signal, let you know our things are green
Yep.
and we're looking good. Great. If something's kind of like yellow and it's like, I might need to dig in, or if like alerts like, hey, this is redlining, you need to pay really close attention
It should
to
be
this and figure out
it should
what
be the canary in the
causing
coal mine, to use a very old, outdated reference, right? Like they used to take the canary down the coal mine, and if it was alive, they knew there was enough oxygen down there. The canary was not breathing, then you knew you had to get out of the coal mine because there was not enough oxygen. And that's at a very simplistic level what the numbers are meant to do. Like oftentimes leaders find themselves in bad positions, not because something happened like that. It was a slow bleed that tends to happen, that isn't identified quickly. Like you can, there's the old adage that you can boil a frog if you just slowly turn up the water and it won't jump out of the pot, because it doesn't recognize that it's like the water is getting warmer and warmer and warmer. Oftentimes as leaders, we don't realize that expenses are slowly creeping up. We think, oh, it's only a little bit higher than last month. Oh, it's only a little bit higher than the month before. And then you go 6 months down the road and you're like 150% over where you were. You're like, oh no, we have a problem now.
Yeah, that makes sense. So on the back end, so one, I mean, numbers need to be kind of like relative to your situation. And then you need to have enough data to really let you know and give you put your finger on the pulse, and things like that. Now, what are some like common mistakes that you see? I mean, you've probably seen behind hundreds of different businesses. What are like best practices or just kind of like common mistakes that you see founders make that are when they're picking an accountant or wanting to work with an accountant, that you think if they were better educated would help them find the right professional to work with?
So I think when it comes to picking an accountant, and this is true, I think, for any professional, that like anybody that you're bringing onto your team, it's important to view it as just like you'd hire an employee, and that you are going to have a relationship with this person. Oftentimes what happens is when we hire someone, and this is true for employees, contractors, professionals, whatever the case is, we're usually hiring to remove a pain from our plate, right? Like there's something we don't like to do, or we don't know how to do it, or whatever it is, and it's distracting from us, and we need to get it off of our plate so we can focus on other things that we think are more important or more enjoyable, but whatever the case may be. And so we hire someone, and that's kind of the end of the engagement. Like we don't view it as anything other than, okay, they're here, I can hand this stuff off to them and it'll be great. And the problem with that is they're only as good as you can let them be on some level, right? Meaning that, like, do they understand your business? Are you answering the questions they have? Are you listening to the feedback that they're providing to you? And so I think that the first thing I would say is approach it like it's going to be a long-term relationship. And so with that comes, does the person understand you and your industry? Do they understand your goals? Do they communicate in a way you want? More and more I see people wanting to communicate via text. That's great. But if your accountant doesn't want to text, but you do, well, that's kind of that's a barrier for you to be successful right off. It doesn't mean they're not skilled. It doesn't mean they're not great, but they may not be great for you, right? There are great people out there, but they're not the right person for us. And so I think a lot of it is being honest in what you need and not compromising on that in the relationship that you're creating. I think that's more often than anything the biggest thing. And then the second thing I would say is, and this is going to sound like I'm trying to be snooty, and I don't mean it to be in any capacity, but the term bookkeeper and accountant are generic terms. So there's no specificity to what that means. There's no degree or certification that you can get in bookkeeping necessarily, there are, but they're not uniform, right? So as compared to, say, a CPA, where there's like a test similar to the board, the law, the law side of things. And that doesn't mean that a CPA is going to be better for you, but it also means that there's probably more variability when hiring a bookkeeper or something like that. So really understanding like what is their background, where do they focus on, how does their operations work, what is the engagement going to be like for you? Like just really understanding who they are and how they're going to engage with you is so critical to that process.
Yeah, that makes sense. Essentially, you got to know what you want and know what you need. And then I think a lot of people, one of the mistakes that I made early on is like, I just didn't do enough due diligence in actually talking with potential accountants and figuring out, like talking with multiple potential accountants. I was just like, I don't want to have to do this. I know this needs to get done. So it's like you hire the first person with a pulse that responds to your email.
Yeah, 100%. And you know what? That doesn't just happen in accounting, right? It happens across a lot of fields. It's like, you to your point, right? I suspect you probably were thinking what I said was accurate, which is like, I don't want to deal with accounting. I'm just going to deal with like whatever happens. That's fine, right? Like, I'm sure it's okay. That's where long-term, like that can, maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't. But I think treating it like talking to multiple people, comparing what they say to each other, going back and having follow-up conversations if you want, like view it as a hire, and a hire you do a background check, you do due diligence, right? Like you'd make sure that the person you're bringing in isn't just someone who someone said was good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really, I mean, you got to talk with multiple people, but then like with if you're hiring any new member to your team, which I really think you nailed it on the head, you need to view your potential accountant as that, like they're a part of your team. So if you're going to hire somebody to play a key role on your team, you want to have your 4 R's, you want to know the job descriptions, you want to know like what are the responsibilities, the roles, and everything really mapped out so that you have the right expectations and you can communicate what is the vision, what are the expectations, and what do I want out of it. But then also, if you know what you want, you can communicate it and see if there's something that they can actually do. And if not, do they know anybody who's willing to meet your expectations and kind of meet you where you want to be?
You said something that's really, really important. I want to emphasize it for your listeners, which is expectations. So one of the things that I am a huge believer in is that the difference between what actually happens and your expectations is how happy you are. So the smaller the difference between what you expected to have happen and what actually happens, the happier you're going to be. But you can only have that right expectation, right, if you define what your expectations are and what you're looking to get out of this situation. That's true for a relationship. That's true for anything, right? We are anchored to what we think is going to happen. And when that doesn't happen, even if what happens is better than what we expected, we are not as happy as if what had we wanted to have happen actually just happened.
That makes sense. And you know what's funny? We'll oftentimes, one of the things that I'll even work with our team on internally is they want to like really wow clients, right? And go completely above and beyond. I'm like, if you just give them exactly what they expect, people are you'd be surprised by how like happy and elated they are, right? And they're more thrilled about getting their expectations met because there's so many people that are just disappointing in the marketplace that you just go from one person to another, just kind of like your expectations not really being met. That when you can find somebody who just meets your expectations, like, wow, that was actually pretty awesome.
I remember one of the best pieces of advice my parents ever gave me. They said, if you do what you say you're going to do, you're better than 95% of the people out there.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that just doing what people ask isn't enough. Like if you can give them what they want, they're happy. And then you have the opportunity to exceed expectations at that point, right? But like, make sure you give them what they want, what they need first. And then you can then it's a much easier process to bring them along to like other greater things.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're pretty high touch as an accountant. So like, who is a good client for you? Like what kind of entrepreneur or business is a good client for what you're looking for?
Yeah. So, at a very high level, we try to work with founders and entrepreneurs. It's not that I won't work with business owners or second generation, but there is something a little bit more personal about the business for a founder and the way they approach it that I enjoy that aspect. Ideally, we're able to help people the most when they're sort of approaching the $1 million annual revenue threshold. We can do a lot for people once they're hitting like 3 to 4 million and above in annual revenue. There's a lot of opportunities to help them. Below that, it's not that we can't help them, but it's there's a limit to what's available just from a sort of complexity standpoint, if you will. And so that's sort of like the high level avatar. And then I think as you get more specific, there are areas that we focus more on. So like agencies and marketing, like that area where there's like, kind of a firm at the backside, and then work a lot with people in the medical professional industry, doctors, dentists, chiros, things like that, and helping them scale their practices as best we can.
Okay. Yeah, I'm kind of glad you mentioned. I actually have a couple people in mind to connect you with on that, which is really good. I didn't know that. So I learned something new, and I immediately thought about like 5 people. I was like, oh,
great. That's awesome. I love that.
I know like 5 people I can connect you with like today who serve exactly that. So for you, you want more established business owners. I mean, they don't need to be crazy established, but need to have close to product market fit, around 7 figures in annual revenue, or clearly on their way there. People that you can serve at the highest degree, where you can help them with a lot of different options, or above 3 million in annual revenue.
Yeah, I mean, you said like my approach comes from the background of like, I don't want a lot of clients. I want a certain amount of clients that I can provide the quality experience with, meaning that like I'm there when they need me. But let's not sugarcoat this. Like, I don't run a charity, which means that like I have to get paid for that, and that to have that sort of like involvement. And for me, it's a little bit more. And so it just doesn't make sense for businesses that are starting out or maybe not as established, because truthfully, like while they would benefit from it, it's not a good investment. Like I just can't consciously tell them like, yeah, you should hire me and immediately make me one of your most expensive cost centers. Like that's a terrible advice. Like why would I get someone? So that's really more around where the revenue makes sense. Is it's more about helping them in a way that like is in alignment with what I would tell anyone. Like I don't want to be giving bad advice to anyone.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you want to operate with you already do operate with the level of integrity, but it sounds like when you're talking with someone, you're really thinking about, all right, does this actually make sense for you? And is it too early, right? If it's too early for someone to work with you, what kind of recommendations do you give them?
It's a great question. To be honest with you, it's one of the hardest conversations that I have to have every once in a while, is where it's like, I know I could help them, but I'm not able to help them given where things are at. So what I try to help talk them through with that in that moment is we can do some sort of assessments for them, where we give them kind of a blueprint of like, hey, here are some areas that like I would pay close attention to. Here are some things that probably need some scrubbing or some cleanup. And here are some areas where, on a sort of more DIY standpoint, like if I was going to allocate your time and capital, like I would do it in these areas, right? And we look at that from a tax and an accounting standpoint. And I think that that's helpful because it gives them something to run with for a while as they scale. And then what I advise them is like, as their business is growing, like here are the milestones where it may make sense for us to re-engage if you want, and where I might be able to help you at these points. Again, sort of always operating from a place of like not telling them to do something that I wouldn't tell myself.
I love that. So we're kind of nearing up on time here. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you feel like would be beneficial that I didn't really ask you about?
If it's okay, there's a couple sort of general pieces of advice that I'd like to share that might, your listeners as business owners might be that might be good for them, or they might find beneficial. So the first one is, it's really important to think of your business and you as an individual as separate things. Now you might go like, well, that's obvious, Nolan. Like, why is that important? Well, I mean that both financially and kind of mentally and emotionally, right? And what I mean by that is, when you're an entrepreneur, when you're a founder, so much of your worth can get tied up in the success of your business, or the perceived success of your business, that it can have a real impact outside of the work. But one of the healthiest things that you can do for yourself is to treat your business as something separate from you, and that it can be independent in the way it performs. And that also means that to do that, you need to treat yourself as a vendor or an employee just like you would anyone else like you, which means you need to be respectful of yourself within the practice or your business. A lot of times I see people, they're getting by, or rather they show great profitability at the expense of paying themselves, or they make decisions that are against what their personal goals and ambitions are. And it makes it even harder down the road to make those choices and sort of get out from underneath. If you're not paying yourself what you should, well, you're kind of just building a practice that is a bit of a jail cell for yourself. And it's not going to get easier to sort of get out from underneath of that. So I think it's really important that, as you go through that, you sort of keep those things separate as best you can. If you're just starting out, make sure you have a business bank account. Make sure it's separate from everything. If you're going to pay for something and you're going to use business funds, but it's a personal expense, transfer the money, then pay for it. It just creates a lot cleaner things as you scale and grow the business, because at some point, hopefully you're going to get to a point where you're really taking off and you won't have all those pieces sitting there that are sort of like, they're not skeletons, but they're out there and you got to deal with them, right? I think that makes a ton of sense. It's very hard to not do that, just to be clear. Like, I don't mean to suggest it's easy, but it is if you can do it and you can hold yourself to that, that's a really important way to make sure that the tax liability that your business creates doesn't create a personal funding problem at the end of the year, that you aren't, that you have the means to live on personally, and that frankly, you're evaluating business decisions, factoring in your personal well-being, right? Like, don't go invest in something if you haven't invested in yourself yet first. Like, otherwise you will start to resent the business and it will be something that you aren't able to be as successful.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's a really important message, because it's very easy as an entrepreneur. I've been guilty of this, just kind of like giving everything to the business and leaving like little to nothing for yourself, right? So make sure you separate the two and actually paying yourself what you're worth, and making sure you're taking care of like your personal needs and making sure like those things are being met. And then also thinking through strategically, like, what do you need to do with the business, and factoring in like your personal needs as well. So I really love that you share that. What are the books that you would recommend?
One more thing.
Go ahead, add one more.
Oftentimes the pushback I get from people on that is, yeah, but Nolan, the business needs the cash. Okay, you know what? Then contribute the money back to the business, but make it a conscious decision to do that. Don't just leave it in the business. Like, pay yourself, and if the business needs money and you need to fund it, then give it back to the business. But make it a choice to do that, because you will feel the transaction on either side. The business will pay and you will feel that pain. And when you give it back to the business, you will feel that pain individually. And there is something good about that feel. It's a conscious decision rather than an unconscious one that you're doing. That's really critical to getting over these sort of like milestones that as businesses scale, they need to push through.
That is a very good point. So essentially, like, you want to make sure if the business needs it, you still pay yourself and then give it back to the business. So you're actually stamping those transactions. That's a great frame. Now, before we kind of jump off, like, what's any quotes, anything that you've learned in the last year that you that you feel is worth quoting to leave
I'll
the
give you
audience
two quotes
with?
if that's okay. One is going to be my own, so that's kind of cheating, I suppose. But I think one of the most important quotes that I live by day to day, I think, is Winston Churchill. Perfection is the enemy of progress. It's very easy to get caught up in, I just need this thing so I can do that. Just do it.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes you just got to pull the trigger and you deal with it later. But like, don't let like that need to be perfect on something be the inhibitor for like what could be something great. Like, it's very easy to sort of like not execute on something because of that. So that's one. And then I'll quote myself on this, which is, and this is, my kids probably will cringe because they hear this all the time, which is, success is preparedness plus opportunity. What I mean by that is, you have to have both to be successful. There's a lot of people who are really prepared but never get the opportunity. And there are people who will get the opportunity but are unprepared to take advantage of it. But you need to have both to be successful. So at a minimum, you can't control opportunity, you can control being prepared. So always be prepared. Give yourself the most options so that when the opportunity comes along, you can execute on it so you can be successful.
That makes perfect sense. Well, Nolan, man, just a man of golden nuggets, just dropping a ton of value. Now, for those who are listening and they feel like they'd be a great fit to explore a potential engagement, where can they find you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn if you'd like. Sometimes that's an easy place to connect. Nolan Bradbury. You can find us on our website, which is bradfieldco.com. Not Bradbury, bradfieldco.com. If you want to just email me because you have some questions or you want to connect and you want to talk through some things, you can email me and I'll give you my personal email. It's Nolan, very creatively, at bradfieldco.com. So reach out, let me know, and happy to engage and see if there's something I can do to help you.
Yeah, depending on where you're listening or watching, you can include the links to all those things in the show notes. But man, Nolan, it's been an absolute pleasure having you. I want to just, for those of you guys who are listening, just kind of really summarize at a high level. When you're looking to work with a potential account, really view them as an addition to your team. Do the proper process that you'd go through to hire a new team member. Have your expectations and what you want dialed in. And then as far as your business goes, treat the two separately. Like your business and yourself personally should be separate. And then make sure you're taking care of yourself. And then there was one more thing that you added that I thought was really, really helpful, but I'm
please.
slipping on it.
Was it the last?
It was the last thing that you just added. It was
the formula.
What was it?
Success. The success
Share
equals preparedness plus opportunity. Is that the one you're talking about?
No, it was before Snap. Well, you're just gonna have to re-listen to the podcast to get it. But those are the two main things at the top of the mind, and then the success equals preparedness plus opportunity. I think that's a powerful quote. So thank you so much for jumping on with me. For those of you guys who are listening, hope you found it helpful. Go ahead, and if you found it helpful, share it with somebody else who you think needs it. And go ahead and leave your thoughts below. Like, how's your experience with an account been? Comment below. Has it been great? If it's been terrible, share why it's been terrible. And Nolan will be on the lookout for those with terrible experiences to hopefully engage and turn those things around. All right. Till next time, stay calm, change lives, and have business on your terms.